In this episode of the Why Am I podcast, I sit down with Justin from Library Punk to explore how librarianship, leftist critique, and punk rock intersect. We talk about moving across the country, parasocial podcasting, career pivots, and organizing for systemic change. All through the lens of a library worker who just might be your favorite quiet radical. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Justin. Justin, thanks for joining me on the Why Am I podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. So every guest that comes in here, obviously has unique life experiences, paths they've been down. I found you through some random research. I had kind of a wild hair that jumped in my head and I went down a rabbit hole and then out you popped, which is fascinating to me. Like I never know when somebody's going to say yes, and you were kind enough to, so I appreciate that. But the one question I tend to ask everyone is, who are you?
I am a library worker. I'm a free writer. I'm a wobbly, which is I'm an active union member in the IWW. And I have a leftist library podcast where we play inside baseball and talk about the field and do a lot of internal critiques, which I think is why it never really breaks containment. Because really, to get most of the critiques, you'd have to be living it every single day and realizing, like, oh yeah, that's a problem. So yeah, I try not to define myself by my job too much. It's just like librarianship has also become a hobby because of the podcast. It's never something I've done for work. It's always something I've done in the context of, doing labor organizing in the field or consciousness raising or critique of the field. And it's a useful way to talk about other issues. When you have the one thing you can use it as a lens for other things to talk about, things that you're passionate about. You can do it with anything.
Something that struck me is I've never heard anybody talk about the way they work the way you do as the field. You make it, I don't know, like it almost seems like you're imbuing it with like that it's a real living thing. I've never really thought about it like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a care profession. You do it much like teaching because it is mostly teaching. I mean, that's most of what you do is instruction, teaching people how to use the library, how to use computers, how to find information, how to structure their questions. Most people don't know how to ask a question when they're genuinely looking for something, because if they knew, they would kind of just do it on their own. So when someone comes to you with a question, they really could ask you the entirely wrong thing and could be halfway down the wrong path before you've got to ring them back in and say, like, let's structure what it is you're trying to get out of this interaction. That's the most important thing. Every librarian, pretty much everyone will agree that's the most important class you take in library school, which is, the reference interview kind of class.
That's interesting. So do you feel like part of your job is actually teaching people how to ask the right question?
Oh, I mean, that is part of the job. Doing the reference interview is like the core of basic librarianship.
You're going to have to remember, I don't know any of the nomenclature you're about to, so yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And that's the other thing is I tend to use a lot of, I've tried to make sure that we remain, because it's not just for librarians to listen to and library workers in general, but sometimes I just get into the weeds and I'm thinking about something faster than I can say it.
Trust me, this is one of the things I absolutely love, is that you live in this world that has its own vocabulary, right? Its own modes of operation. And like, that fascinates me. So like, feel free to go as deep as you want whenever you're talking about that kind of thing.
Yeah. So to give you an example of something I thought was really good example of this, I was at like a Home Depot or Lowe's, and I needed a tarp to cover like some stuff, like some materials that were outside my house. And so I went up to the guy and I said, "Hey, I need a tarp." And he said, "Oh, cool. What's the project?" And I thought, that's good. because now he knows what kind of tarp I'm going to look for. And I said, well, I just have stuff outside that I need to protect from the rain because it's supposed to rain soon. And he goes, oh, that's the outdoor tarps. You want to go over there to the garden section because they have tarps for painting indoors. They have tarps that are clear for putting down on grass to let the sun go through and kill the grass. So by asking me what the project was, he understood what the actual need was rather than just say, there's the tarps and point me towards them. Maybe I'd buy the wrong one. So just teaching people to say that first follow-up question is like half the game.
That's cool.
And so when I've always worked in university, so a student comes up to me and says, I want a book about the Roman Empire. I say, is this for a class? And if they say yes, I go, okay, tell me about the assignment. And they go, well, my professor said I have to get 3 sources for my paper this week. And then I say, I can guarantee you your professor doesn't want you to read 3 books this week. You're in English 101. They don't want you to read 3 books. What they were talking about is articles and reference articles from an encyclopedia. We can get you like a large article from an encyclopedia. We'll get you a scholarly article, and we'll get you something that's maybe not peer reviewed, something appropriate for your level. If someone says, no, I'm just interested, I go, there they are. I just walk them over to the section where the Roman Empire books are.
Do you feel like college kids are encouraged to use the local library as a resource these days? Honestly, I just assumed everybody's like started to transition to just purely going to the internet.
Well, a lot of the stuff in university that you need to access is still going through the library because those are very expensive subscriptions that your public library is not going to have.
I smell what you're cooking.
So yeah, even if it's all online, which is where a lot of our traffic goes, it is still, we have to remind people like that is still running through the library. Like if it breaks, I have to fix it. Like it doesn't go somewhere else. Like it still comes to the library to be fixed. So then we try and build, the website to do those things that I just talked about. And that's much, much more difficult because you no longer control the interaction. You have to put something out there and hope people can use it in the right way. So you put these tools out there like the catalog and, Pathfinder guides, which is a weird phrase. It just kind of means like a research guide, like how to do research on this topic. We usually just call them by the brand name, which is LibGuides, because that's kind of the software everyone uses, but technically that's a brand name. So it's like the Kleenex of the field. But everyone kind of calls them that. But the non-brand name term is Pathfinders for whatever reason. I only ever used that term in library school. So yeah, it's much more difficult when you're doing it online. And yeah, I think because university is the only time you have access to that amount of subscription content that you're not going to have the rest of your life, it kind of passes a lot of people by and they don't realize like the wealth of stuff they have access to during those few years in college. Because you really only get good at research towards the end, if at all.
That's interesting. I used to work for a company that had a sister company that did like a bunch of R&D and stuff like that. And through the local university, we maintained a connection to them specifically so they could get to that stuff. And for some reason, that just completely fell out of my head because that was like this. And trust me, if the connection went down, I was the first one getting yelled at about it. It became like so key to everything these folks were doing. Yeah.
When I worked at a university that had a medical school, most of the faculty at medical schools do that work to get access to the library. Because they work, 5-10% time. They just teach like one little thing. And the main benefit is they get access to these big research collections at the medical school.
That's cool. Do you ever find yourself falling down the rabbit hole? Like,
of course,
looking at some of that content?
You got to stop yourself. But yeah, I mean, the ones that are the most fun is like the big reference databases, because those are, thousands of dictionaries and encyclopedias that are specialist. Wikipedia is great because like anyone can access it and it's huge. But the really cool thing is a specialist encyclopedia is going to approach a topic from a specific viewpoint. So when you want to talk about something like, and it's hard to come up with one off the top of my head, but like, say you want to talk about the concept of sin, you can like put that into an encyclopedia or put it into a database and say, here's the Catholic encyclopedia, here's the Latter-day Saints encyclopedia, here's the philosophical encyclopedia, and they're all going to go at it different ways. Or like the term information literacy, the way English professors and librarians use the term is very different. And so I try not to use that term with them because we librarians and English faculty use the term very differently. So, if there was a library science encyclopedia and English pedagogy, you would have very different things. And you don't get that with Wikipedia. So that's one of the nice things when you have a nice reference database to play around with. You can fall down the rabbit hole in that. Absolutely.
That's cool. Yeah, I could definitely see myself in your position where you're asking, so, well, what can what can I help you with? Like, what exactly is the task you're trying to accomplish? And then finding myself getting interested in the thing that they are talking to me about, and they're trying to, like, I could see myself just getting lost in these rabbit holes all the time, like just finding my way through all these interesting things that other people are talking about.
I think the best thing about this career is, one, there's no useless knowledge, because anything you learn, someone might come to the door one day and ask you about it. So absolutely nothing you learn in your entire life is going to be useless because it might come up. And the other part is, if you like learning things but don't want to spend your life over specializing like an academic does, you get to keep that broad swath of stuff. Plus, a lot of the day-to-day work, which is very computer heavy. All right. So maintaining all the electronic resources is like most of what I'm doing right now. So getting them all up and running, fixing, usability issues, making sure that the catalog's working better because it's been a little neglected. I just started a new job. So, I'm taking over from a couple people who have left. So it's got some neglect and things kind of don't work as well over time. So someone needs to go through and make sure everything's working optimally.
So, like, in your day to day, what do you find the most compelling? Is it things like that where you've got a whole new task where you're taking it over and you go do this cleanup, so there's some discovery element to it, and then get it working all smooth? Or like, what I think derives the most satisfaction for you?
I mean, there's some days like today where it's really frustrating because you have to work with a vendor, right? So you're doing a lot of business to business communication. Yeah. So, I had to be on the phone and sit on hold today trying to get to the right person to help me fix this issue that I'm pretty sure only they can fix. I don't think it's anything on my end. So just trying to get to the right team at, this is LexisNexis, so huge company. So I got bounced between a couple teams, and then finally they're like, okay, we're going to make a ticket for this and elevate it to our engineers so that they can see exactly what's going wrong. So we're going to get someone who's a little more specialized to get back to you in like a day. So, I spent, 2 or 3 hours kind of finding the support number because I didn't have it on hand, and trying to set up like a support account, and I didn't need that. So I didn't feel like I got a whole lot done today, but it's, this is one of the big tasks that has kind of been on the back burner because it's a pain to deal with. So I know that making progress on it's going to be good. And then, for like 15, 20 minutes, I go through the mail and I get all the physical cereals that we've gotten in, and I just process them and I take them out to the stands and I put them up and I put them in the stacks. And that's really satisfying too, because, it's nice sorting and organizing things. Like if you enjoy doing that, if you're the kind of kid who like organized your toy cars by color and size, like I did, like this is how you have fun. If you did that as a child, you find a lot of people like that in libraries. In all kinds of jobs, not just librarian.
Yeah, I could see that being a calling for folks that are heavy on the organizational skills. Sounds like you also like to, and honestly, this is me to some degree, or at least it used to be until that was kind of stripped away from you. The idea that you can check things off of your list, like, oh, I feel like I've actually completed something today, and it feels like little mini wins. The more you can do that, do you feel like that is something you're usually looking for?
Yeah, I mean that's really nice. I didn't have a lot of it with my last position because it was really pushing. It was a lot of building relationships and getting people to agree to like fund certain things and not really having the authority to like make those decisions on my own. So a lot of making friends and influencing people kind of stuff. And so you got to, get the provost on your side. You got to get the the library dean on your side. You got to get maybe a dean of another college on your side about something. And I was really successful, but after a while, a lot of stuff was running automatically. And so it was like, what am I actually working on right now, other than just keeping all these plates spinning? And that was kind of how it felt. And I had a more specialized roles, and there were more specialized roles at that university. So I couldn't really just like, okay, I'm going to go work on something completely different. It's like, no, I still have to just focus on this. And it's like, whatever this is, which is a lot of like training new librarians. I had 3 different librarians who just come out of library school. So a lot of mentoring, getting them up to speed, kind of dealing with their personalities and being like, okay, here's where you're weak. Here's something I want you to work on. So I kind of enjoy the position I'm in now, where I'm more of a generalist, and I'm a faculty librarian. And so, right now I'm kind of fixing a lot of the technical services stuff, which is like the website. That's a broad term that usually means like cataloging, e-resources, stuff like that. And then once the fall rolls around, I'll have to shift much more into a teaching role. So going into classrooms, working with departments that I'm liaison to, and meeting faculty and trying to get them to integrate the library into their classes, or providing support for assignments and stuff like that. Stuff that I need for my faculty assessment.
Gotcha. It sounds like in your previous role, it sounds very similar to kind of the path I took. So I used to be an individual contributor. I had monster list of things I was always having to take care of, and so I was checking stuff off. And then once I started like moving into management, I started handing off those wins, especially the quick and easy wins, to my people, so that they could feel that sense
they got
of
all the wins.
They got all the wins, and I got stuck with the stuff that never ended. It was making relationships, working with vendors, and it's like, dude, there's no winning when you're working with vendors. It feels like a constant slog. And so it's like it took me a little while, but I had to kind of redefine, I guess, my measuring stick. Like, instead of like I'm productive by hitting these tick boxes, I had to just kind of like rearrange my brain a little bit, and that kind of served me. And also I wrote down sales. It sounds like you are a salesperson. Like, essentially that's what you're doing. You're establishing relationships, developing a rapport, and convincing people to work with you. And that's essentially what sales is. And that's another one that's hard to get wins in sometimes.
It's not marketing, because I remember having faculty say marketing is different from sales. This skill set is sales, this skill set is marketing, and they're very different. Don't confuse them. So it is very much sales. It's very much, here's how this is a win for both of us, or why don't we try this out together, or something like that. And you get a lot of indoor kids in libraries. So people who aren't very good at building new relationships sometimes. So, and I'm not naturally like that. It's a skill. Everything is a skill. Public speaking is a skill. Learning to speak on a microphone is a skill. Like, you learn how to mediate your tone in ways that people notice. I just had a new barber the other day. He's like, do you do audiobooks? I was like, no, but I didn't realize that my voice came out that way. I know when we started doing the podcast, Sadie was in a work meeting like a few months later, and someone was like, "Do you have a podcast?" And they weren't using like fancy. They were just using their headset, but they had learned to speak clearly and straightforwardly into a microphone.
That's so funny. That's so funny. Accusations.
Yeah.
You either feel attacked or seen in those scenarios.
Right, yeah. Probably both.
Everything is a skill. I like that, though, because I 100% agree with that. I think you can develop everything. It makes me curious, what's made you, if you are an indoor kid yourself, what made you decide to get on a microphone? Because for a lot of people, I've noticed that doing the podcast thing can be exceptionally scary. I mean, I'm sure you've asked guests or folks that you'd like to be guests, would you want to come on? And there's like, oh, never, I could never do that. Right. So it's a terrifying experience for some people. And so what convinced you to kind of surmount that fear?
I got to handle it early on. I was a singer in a punk band in high school. So that was where my first experience on the mic. So that really took care of a lot of the microphone phobia, because I think people the having to control your voice in a new way through a mediated instrument is difficult. I think that's a big part of it. And then I took a public speaking class in community college and made sure that I kept up those skills and took it seriously and got better at it, and made sure that I was speaking but not rambling, having shorter sentences, not trying to sound overly erudite by having these really, really long, something undergraduates do, have really, really long sentences when they're overcompensating for they feel like they're not great writers. And actually a great writer learns how to write short sentences very well and clearly. So you tend to do that with speaking too.
What's a big part of it too is stage fright, right? And if you were a singer in a band, I'm sure that helped get you over that hurdle pretty easily.
Yeah, I think it still would show up for a while. And also because you're a teacher, like I speak in front of people all the time. I've, been an instructor in college classes. I've had to do presentations for every job I've had. So I had to go in front of a bunch of people who are more experienced than me as librarians and say, here's why I should have a job. Here's this prompt you've given me to talk about for 45 minutes in front of a room of strangers, or I don't know anyone. And that was one that I would still get stage fright going into it. For a while it was job interviews, but I've done so many now at this point. I'm probably too relaxed sometimes, where I feel like,
Do folks in the library industry swap spots a lot? It's some reason in my brain, I just figured you guys would find a spot and kind of settle in. Is there just a lot of movement around?
Academics tend to move a lot, I would say, in general.
Okay.
There are definitely a lot of people who like plant themselves and get their 20 years done and stick with it. But I want to live different places. So I've always been like planning on staying a few years and moving somewhere else, and then a few years and living somewhere else. So I actually just left Texas, and I was planning on staying there only about 5 years. I ended up there about 7 or 8. So, but it was because I got a promotion, and so they got to keep me on longer, and I was getting paid pretty well. So they did their best to keep me there.
Yeah, it's golden handcuffs. Where in Texas were you?
Down on the border, McAllen. So in the Rio Grande Valley, I was like 12 miles from the border.
Yeah, you're way down there. I live in College Station, so I'm over here by Texas A&M.
Okay, yeah. I've never been to College Station.
It's really boring. Don't bother.
Yeah, I've heard it. There's not much going on, but library at Texas A&M had a pretty bad situation a couple years ago. A lot of people I know had to leave their jobs.
Oh, wild. I'm pretty much out
totally
of the loop
restructured.
On that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know there was a big regime change not so long ago, and a whole lot of they probably got caught in that, which always freaked me out. That's like I had so I've been in IT like my entire career, and I had some friends that obviously you can't live in town and not know people at a university where there's 60,000 students, right? It's like you're gonna know some people there. And there's this one guy, Chris, I'd known, worked over there years and years and years. Really good guy, worked really hard, was about to make kind of a director level spot. Well, some new regime came in and basically just put everybody out to pasture and just put in their people, just installed all of their people. And it blew my mind that like your dedication, your skill level, none of that really matters. Like somebody can just come in and nah, not anymore. I'm just going to bring my friend that has been working with me for a few years. I'm just going to bring him in, install him in that spot. Like, does that not freak you out at all?
On one hand, yeah. I mean, that was why I left my job. When I did I was reporting to the dean left, and then I went back to reporting to the original person I was reporting to, who I'd been moved out from because we didn't get along. And so when I moved back to him, I'm like, all right, we're going to give this a shot. Hopefully it's better this time. And then as soon as he started, the pattern of behavior again, I was like, I'm out. So just the next day I packed everything and I was like, here's my letter. No notice. I'm out. Here's my keys. And left.
I think you might be my hero, Justin.
People have said that. People have been like, leaving without a plan. It's like, yeah, but I'd been applying for jobs for months,
Oh, okay.
I didn't have anything lined up though, but I knew roughly how long I could hold out. I was planning on selling my house and moving up to Boston to be with my boyfriend, and that just didn't work out because with all the federal layoffs, everyone is clamped down with all the grant money leaving Massachusetts because Boston's basically a big healthcare hub now. With all those healthcare grants being canceled by the federal government, everyone is just locking down. So there's a lot of hiring freezes at all the universities because, like $1 billion just left their economy.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Some of my customers are in like a good chunk of them are in research, and the amount of cancer research that has been defunded is like unsettling. I think most people probably have no insight into that, but I see it because I'm literally working with these people and helping them do all this stuff. And then just, their funding just locks, just solid. Like, sorry, we can't spend, we can't do this project that we need to, so they're basically just hanging on for dear life right now. It's terrifying.
Yeah. And it's really difficult to explain to people because even within universities, like, if you're not involved in the grant process, you don't really understand how it works. Like, okay, like the grant organization is paying for my process, but we have to invest a certain amount of money before someone else will give us a grant. And then once they give us the grant, that we have to reinvest to get like the people we actually need to do the thing we want to do in the grant. And then they pay for some of the overhead. So it's like really, really entwined in this grant cycle. And then you say, oh, the overhead should be limited to 15% and whatever. And someone outside will be like, this sounds reasonable. But it's not. Like, this whole system has been built to sort of direct the funding priorities of the government. The government wants to fund these things in a certain way. And just the amount of disruption that happened by just going, oh, we're putting a pause on everything is going to take a long time to fix. I'm not trying to be like orange man bad about this, but like genuinely, this is like a big infrastructure of slow moving stuff with a lot of money. And, if you just rip it out, what do you think's going to happen? Like, it's not going to be great. And it's going to take a long time to redo all that labor.
Yeah.
A lot of, people getting fired and hired, you got to undo that. What do you think it is? It's work. It's just work. It's people doing their day in, day out stuff.
Yeah. And some of the labs, the folks I've talked to have said something to the effect of, it's going to take more than just 4 years with a regime change to get this research back on track. I mean, it's maybe going to take a decade for some of them to really get everything. And it's like, that sucks. Because
it's hard to explain the scale. Yeah. I know a lot of research scientists. And so, watching them just react to this and then no one else outside that world getting it, it makes you feel crazy.
Yeah. And nobody's going to truly understand it for quite a long time. I think
Yeah.
there's just, well, honestly, there's so much other insanity going on right now that it's
That's part
hard
of
to
it
see
too.
that too, right? Yeah. But let's not go down a really depressing rabbit hole. Something that intrigued me is you were talking about travel and you want to move around a lot. Like
Yeah.
what is it inside of you that makes you have those itchy feet where you just got to get up and you kind of keep moving?
I think it was kind of seeing everyone in my family decide they weren't going to move around. Like they're just here and that's it. And I think I got disillusioned with that pretty young. In terms of like, this is the way you should live. And I mean that very much in like a Christian sense of like, this is what it is to be a good person. And it's to do all of these things, like work really, really hard and have this set of beliefs and, you know, do this order of operations for your life. And then as that started to unravel for me, I went, oh, actually, I want to see what other people are doing. I don't want to be in this town for the rest of my life. I want to just, it doesn't matter where I'm going. Like, I'm not trying to go like to the big city. I moved to rural Texas. But it was a cool place to live, because it's a unique area. Like borderlands are really interesting, and it was like, just rednecks, but everyone's Latino. Like it was pretty cool. It's just like kind of where I grew up, but, with a different accent, literally.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in rural Florida.
Rural Florida. Okay. Yeah. Probably not that much different then. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, just a little less melanin and but otherwise pretty much the same. Rednecks are rednecks, whether that's in Texas or, peasantry in China. I think if you got a bunch of rednecks and Chinese peasants in a field with just a bunch of beer and like some tractors to play around with, I think the average redneck would become a Maoist within like the end of the week. People are just the same,
Yeah. I love meeting people like so I've got a couple of kids that are almost out of school. So my ability to like move around, I feel like is there. Like that's something I never really wanted to do, was like just pick them up and constantly move them around. I want them to have some kind of, I don't know, some kind of consistency, I guess. I don't know. I wasn't really sure. For good or for bad, I just thought, maybe we can get a little consistency here. It'll make things easier on them. But for me, the ideal, and I've talked about this with my partner, is like if I could spend 1 year in a place, pick up and move, because I want to see all 4 seasons there, or like in Texas, all 2 seasons, exceptionally hot and then cold for a minute, and then or I guess just less hot, and then back to really hot. But yeah, just to get a feel for the people, the culture, like what do people here care about. I really like doing that, meeting people that are so different than me. And this is my kind of little window into that, I guess. But for me, the idea of moving around feels exciting. And I've learned that for most people, it's terrifying. And so when I meet somebody else that truly is excited by the idea, it seems like, so it's like a unicorn. Like it's such a unique status. And I don't understand why people are so afraid of it.
It's more uncommon than you think. Like America is like the United States is like a very mobile society. That's part of our mythos, the freeways and the car. That's very central to our ideology. But most people don't move more than a couple hours away from where they grew up. So, I chose a profession, or just academia in general, where, I knew I was going to have to move for a job, whether I stuck at that first place or not. But I knew moving was in the cards, and I wanted to. I've actually not gotten to travel anywhere near as much as I want to. Every time I've tried to travel abroad, like it's fallen through, so I've never gotten to leave the country. But next week I'm going to be up in Philly for a conference, and never been to Philly, so that's exciting. I've got friends who live there. It's one of the places that's kind of on the top of my list of places to live someday. Seems like a cool place.
Yeah. So do you meet some people through your podcast that eventually, like, if you happen to be in their city, you go and kind of do a little meet and greet? Do you do that kind of thing?
Yeah. There are definitely people who I've met through the podcast Well, it's not so much through the podcast because a lot of them I meet on social media. So like through librarian social networks, which is how I met my co-hosts, Jay and Sadie. So we met on library Tumblr when Tumblr was very librarian heavy and library worker heavy. None of us were librarians yet. So I know we're going to be doing a live show next week. It's our first live show. And I know from the ticket sales that some of the people who are coming are people like that I've met because we've had them on the show. And so this is going to be the first time I'm meeting them in person, but it's also kind of just part of the conference. So, I might have met up with them anyway, but, a lot of it has been trying to maintain those social connections because, with Twitter dying, there were a lot of people who left and I didn't have any other way to contact them. So the podcast was one way of holding that together until a lot of people moved into Discords or moved into Blue Sky or Mastodon. And so we could kind of keep those connections going.
Yeah, that's cool. So I did something similar too. Like I've been in IT and then I started kind of an IT related podcast. Did that for about 10 years before I burned out on it. But yeah, like it was a hobby and then also something that I absolutely loved. And I got to meet some people at conferences. Yeah, I remember walking and I was talking to somebody next to me and the guy in front of me turned around and he goes, "You're Greg." Like he could instantly like recognize my voice.
Yeah.
And it was such a fun, interesting experience because these people, they knew me. They were like my friends, but complete strangers to me. Like that whole parasocial thing is always fascinating to me. Whenever I talk to other people who've maybe experienced that, it was never weird for me though. Like because that's something traditionally I had problems with was making new connections or honestly being in crowds of people was very problematic, and public speaking was absolutely something that I wasn't interested in for a really long time. So it almost felt like a cheat code for me that all of a sudden, like I didn't have to overcome these social barriers. Like this person was already like willing to be my friend. I always found it cool.
That is pretty cool. And conferences are just very pro-social places too. So, you're trying to get on the train to get to the conference and it's like, "Hey, are you heading to the conference too? Okay, maybe we can figure out this train together," and then like you got a little conference buddy for the day. That's always fun. I've run into people who've been in meetings with me and go, "Oh, I listened to your podcast." I don't think I've had that happen in person. Jay has, I think, a couple times, has been recognized for his voice. I'm hoping this will happen when I'm at ALA because I'm going to be walking around doing stuff. So maybe we'll see.
Yeah. Do you guys have swag? Do you have like t-shirts?
I have very secret swag. I didn't tell anyone, not even my co-hosts.
I was gonna say if you show up wearing a t-shirt, man, like
I got some t-shirts made with the URL on the front.
That's pretty dope.
So I'm gonna wear one of those around and see. Because there's thousands of librarians. I don't remember how many people show up at ALA, but I don't know, thousands. So might as well.
Yeah, that's cool. So for me, conferences used to be this time where usually I'd only get to see like these friends that I met at the conference and then became friends, or I met them online and then we'd meet at the conference. It was like the one time a year I'd actually get to see everybody. Is that kind of similar for you guys? Like this is the one in-person meeting you guys have? Is that like one of these big conferences?
Yes. I've never been extremely well funded to go to like the same one every year.
Well,
so I've kind of like, I've mostly switched it around. Like I've been to ACRL once. I've been to the Library Publishing Forum once. This will be my first time at ALA. I've gone to state level ones, which I'm kind of not that into anymore. I didn't do anything in Texas Library Association the whole time I was there. I was interested in, other stuff. But I mean, some people really like the Charleston conference. They love the old buildings. They love going down antiquing or whatever. It's a very boomer, older Gen X coded conference. It's very expensive. And one year, that was the first year they had to do it online for COVID. And that was the first time that like people under 40 went, and we all went, this is not this is not aimed at us. And so everyone kind of bounced off it.
For sure, man. I dig it. Well, and also, I mean, something you mentioned earlier is that your podcast is left leaning. I was just curious, like, as far as librarians here in North America go, are you in the minority? Is that pretty common? Like, as far as all that stuff? I mean, you go so far as to have that in the tagline of the podcast. So I know it's like absolutely important to you.
And to be very clear about it, when I say left-leaning, I mean anti-capitalist left. So, in the realm of anarchism, left-com, I'm a wobbly, so it's anarcho-syndicalist, and my boyfriend's an anarchist. And so, we're talking about like critical of capitalism, anti-capitalist political positions. And of course, that is the minority, because that's not a very common position anywhere in American society. I don't like to mix up what most of what we wanted to be clear about with the aim of the podcast is this is a leftist critique of the field, which is mostly liberal, and liberal by which we mean a focus on individual rights, a focus on free market capitalism, a focus on the individual as the political subject. And so that causes, problems. Like, obviously the kind of regular hypocrisy you see of, we're welcome to all, but then librarianship remains very, very white. Why can't we retain Black librarians? Like, people burn out. We're trying to bring in people who are first generation, but we pay for shit. So people can't move and people can't go to conferences because it's a service industry job, and most people come from middle class backgrounds and, can have a partner who works. Like, try and get a librarian job in New York City on a librarian wage. They pay like $60,000, $70,000. Like, move into that with that in New York City, like downtown, like NYU. Like, that's not enough money to live. And if your partner's got a similar job, that's not enough money. Unless you want to have roommates, like a bunch of roommates, which you could, but you can't really build like a home of like buying a condo or even just having a stable apartment with just two people like that. So that's always like that's why I said a lot of the critiques were inside baseball, because when you sent me the email to come on, you said, you understand that like a left-leaning position might be a way of protecting from kind of political attacks. And no, not really. It was always an internal critique. It was always, these are the, like, let's look at the underlying ideology of like Banned Books Week. Why don't we talk about prison libraries, the most censored libraries? People don't want to talk about prisoners. People don't want to talk about the humanity of prisoners. People don't want to talk about the justice system and all the problems that coincide with that. Talking about like the lack of rights for children. Very relevant in terms of, do they have the right to learn about other people? To learn about things that their parents might not want them to learn about. Yeah, I think they do have the right to that. And generally, I think most Americans do believe that, because we believe in compulsory schooling, and there is a forced aspect to that. A public library is nice because there's an unforced force of just having it around, right? So that the rhetoric for people who want to ban, all queer representation in libraries is a little bit more difficult, but it always starts with a think of the children argument, that queerness is somehow by itself sexual, even though obviously there's stories of princes and princesses and having babies, and I've got a little sister on the way, kind of children's books. You can't have a book about a penguin with two dads. Like, come on.
That argument always was odd to me, the think of the children thing, because it's oftentimes like arguments like that to me feels like it's people that are getting upset on behalf of somebody else. And sometimes you ask them, like, do you even know anybody that's somebody else? And they're like, no, I don't. But in my head, I believe that, so it's, how can you be in defense of something that you don't even have a full understanding of? Like, I just don't understand why these other people also can't think for themselves, why you have to just protect everyone from all these things. Why can't they have a voice in it?
Yeah, it makes you start to think that there's something else going on, something maybe more libidinal or unspoken that you need to get to the bottom of, because you're trying to understand the motivations for why people believe things that they believe, and you try and think about try and be good Marxists and try and do materialist analysis to how does this line up with the major modes of production of our society? How does it how is this in line with the basic structure that we already have, and the sort of momentum that brings along with it. And that was a lot of what we talked about. I think there was a time where I was really interested in, I kind of like in my head have different seasons of the show. So like early, like the first season, we're just trying to like figure out what we're doing. And kind of, what does this look like as like a show? And I kind of modeled it a lot on Trash Future, which is a big podcast in the UK, talk about tech and politics. And I was like, what if we did that with libraries? And so libraries were the lens through which we were going to talk about these things. And you can do that with pretty much anything. I mean, you could have done this with a feminist lens and just kind of look at the world around and then take everything from a starting point of a feminist lens and then build on it, because it gives you one way to focus what you're talking about. And then you could do this with IT. How does IT build into, let's talk about societal issues, like the societal impact of tech, or the tech as or IT as an ideological amplifier. How does it work as a tool for amplifying political desires? Because it doesn't create them, I don't think. But it definitely does. It modifies and amplifies the way that those political messages move. It changes the dynamic of the motion. But, I think when people think about like tech solutionism, they imagine this is some kind of other politics that comes from tech itself. Which, people are adapting to rapid changes, but, there's usually something older going on. It's kind of the same song and dance we've heard before.
It's interesting. Like I'm trying to see you as a person, this person that moves around a lot. It feels like you kind of have kind of this sense of adventure, maybe a little bit. And, your views, some would label you as subversive, I would say. It's probably, or maybe a little dangerous ideologically. I believe there's room for everybody, and I think we need everybody, but you're also very vocal about it. I mean, you run a podcast about it, right? Like that kind of influences and things like that are associated with your beliefs. And how does that affect you, like trying to get another job? Because you said you move around fairly frequently. Like, to me, I'm just thinking like in IT, like a lot of the places we work, it's a lot of stuffy shirts. And so you have to be like very careful about what you say and do all that stuff, and because it could potentially hamstring you trying to move to another job or anything like that. And it sounds like you are just completely fearless, man. It's like, does it not affect you in that way?
I think people respect you more when you just say what you actually believe and say it earnestly and honestly and treat them like an adult. And I think, because I've lived in very conservative places my whole life. So it's not like, developing these ideas was easy. And talking to people, sometimes you don't spill the whole that you don't get into the topic that you feel like is not going to get anywhere, because sometimes people just like to argue, and I don't get anything out of that. I'm not up for a confrontation. I would much rather wait for an opening to say like, hey, here's what I think. And wait for a time when someone's ready to talk about that sort of thing. And then I think people are far more open to what you have to say, even if it's wildly ideologically different. I work with people who are very religious. I'm not. I don't work with people who are very conservative. I'm not. Work with people who are straight. I'm not. I accept all types of strange behavior from people. So I think mostly this works across the political spectrum. If you just are not trying to be either combative or like cloaking what you believe, because, you don't quite believe it, or you feel like, you don't have the confidence of your beliefs. I think because if you believe something, you should just believe it. You shouldn't apologize beforehand for believing it. Like, if you believe it, you should just believe it. I think people do that because they don't want to sound combative or anything like that. But I think it's the opposite. I think if you're clear and open, it just shows people that you respect them. And I would say in librarianship, no, the overwhelming majority of people are going to be liberal and liberal conservative. Like, within the whole liberalism sphere, there'll be people more progressive, people more conservative, and that's what you got. In my sphere, I was focused on scholarly communications, and a lot of that is focused on open access and open data and open research. Because of the openness and sort of anti-capitalist nature of it, you do get more lefties in there. So in that group, you will have more people closer to my politics. But you still have people who are just like, I don't think I'm going all the way with that. I think, markets are still the best. I think capitalism's the best system we've got. And at the end of the day, you're like, okay, it's fine. Like, that's the position of like 95% of everyone in this country. Like, I'm not going to get in a shouting match about it. Like, yeah, it's probably what you're going to believe. It's the majority belief. Like, I don't, I'm not going to argue about that too much. But it is fun when you get to be like around 50-50 in a group, like 50% like leftists and 50% like liberals, because then we get to gang up a little bit. It doesn't happen much in real life.
Well, I also like the approach you're taking. Is you sound very live and let live. Like, like, you can believe what you want. I'm not going to argue with you. But it sounds like if there's an opportunity to maybe inject some thought on a subject, it sounds like you would, I'm assuming, kind of gracefully introduce that. Because, like, for reference, my son is very left leaning. I would say he's a kindred spirit to you, and he wants to scream in my face about things, and it's like, brother, we're not as far apart as you think, but I'm also trying to say that you're not ever going to change anybody's heart or mind by screaming in their face. That's just not how it works. That I would love for him
usually.
You're right, adopt a more gentle approach, I would say. And it sounds like you've got a good mix of that going on in there, which I like.
Yeah, and it's not so much live and let live, because I do think, certain views are odious. Like, if you think that queer people shouldn't exist, I would probably get into a fist fight about that position. So, it's quite upsetting.
Yeah.
So it's not just live and let live. It's just having grown up very conservative and having such a massive change, can understand where people are coming from. And also have a confidence in what I'm saying, because I've thought very hard about it. And have a confidence that if I find out that I'm wrong about something, will change my mind because I've done it before. I think having that confidence helps too. I think if you've kind of just stayed in the same lane your whole life, you might not get that feeling. I'm not sure though. Maybe not. I don't know, because I've only lived my life. That's the problem with it. You don't get do-overs. But yeah, it's interesting talking about like what's what convinces people, because I used to be very interested in this, particularly coming from like a very religious background. Like what changes people's minds actually, like, and there are little things you can kind of pick up from cognitive science. So like, you know, one of the reasons I don't like getting just straight up into a fight is if you trigger someone's what's called a worldview defense, that you bring up something that is absolutely central to their worldview, it shuts them down to pretty much everything else you're about to say. So the conversation's kind of over. And that's very interesting because, you know, there are certain ways our brains behave. Like, oh, if you throw 2 bad arguments at me and 1 good one, the odds are I'm going to reject all 3 of them because in my brain I go, those first 2 are bad. So I bet that 3rd one was bad too. That's a fallacy, but it's how our brains work. So just kind of understanding that and applying it to actual interactions with people. And also realizing that, like, you know, sometimes the shouting does work, strangely enough, because when I talked about that worldview defense, being forced to defend a position multiple times actually does crack through sometimes. So you never really know what it is that's going to convince someone. So it does take all sorts of arguments. But just personally, you know, I would prefer to wait for an opening to talk about something in a way that I think might actually convince someone.
Yeah, I think I've read some stuff too that essentially what you're talking about is it kind of kicks in. I've heard that like if you challenge somebody's political beliefs, sometimes that kicks in like the fight or flight response in somebody's body. Like it neurologically, it's as if you're trying to attack them and stab them with a knife. Like your body's reacting viscerally. So it's, you definitely go on the defense/offense in those scenarios. But I think my best results have been when I hear something that's counter to something I believe, is to approach with curiosity and just start asking, where does it come from? Like if I care to, right? I mean, I don't do this in every situation in life.
Sometimes it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Most of the time, you know, it's whatever. And I you know, it's not worth my energy to put my time into it. But every now and then I will. And usually approaching with curiosity is my favorite approach, especially if I can introduce a kernel of doubt. That's where I leave it. So I'll get to the point where a lot of times it's, you know, what makes you believe that? Like there's a feeling there. What's that feeling? Where does that come from? And a lot of times people will pull it back to, oh, it's something my parents used to tell me. And I say, that's interesting. And then I'll leave it there. Because this is something that somebody else planted in you. It has nothing to do with your actual beliefs, and you're finding your way through life. And so, you know, I've learned if you get to that point and then I keep pushing, then they tend to shut down. But if I can get them just up to that point and then back away where it's just a little tickle in the back of their mind that they think about for a little while. Next time I see them.
Come back to it later.
Yeah, you come back around. It seems to be the most effective. At least on the whole.
Yeah, I think I feel that way. Because, like, you know, major worldview shifts don't happen in people all the time, and you're really never going to know what works or something. And, you know, I'm also not evangelical about this stuff. I don't feel like, you know, I got to get so many salvation points before my time's up. You know, I try and be a political realist of like, people aren't going to be here with me on this, but, you know, I mean, quite honestly, the situation in which a major viewpoint shift across the population will happen will be pretty terrible, probably. Something pretty awful will probably have to happen for that to be the case. Major organizing of society. And, you know, that's not ideal. That's not really the world you want to hope for. It's not one I want to hope for. I would hope that, you know, these changes can happen with the minimum of disruption and, you know, move into a library utopia, you know, where you don't have to go buy a new weed whacker. You just go to the tool library and you get one, you know.
Right.
So it's hard to, you know, to realistically think what causes a massive political shift and realignment in a country and go, yeah, I don't really want that to happen. So, you're planting seeds for trees you might not see grow. And it's just kind of the way you have to deal with it. You also don't know how long you're going to live. So, any moment you're just kind of like, that's all you get to see. So I try not to be too hung up on it.
And that's something I've noticed too, is like you plant seeds all the time, right? Like you try and embody this thing and be the person be the change you want to see in the world, all that stuff. But very rarely do you actually see the fruits where somebody will come back around and directly say, hey, this made a difference. But I tell you what, sometimes when that happens, it's very sustaining for me. It will help bridge until the next one, and it helps kind of keep me going.
It's nice as an educator to see it. Someone comes back around like a year later and they're like, okay, I finally got what you were trying to tell me. And now I really like doing this. And once in a while they'll be like, oh, I want to be a librarian now. I go, no, you don't.
Oh, you sweet summer child.
Well, I usually just have like some questions whenever someone interviews me about like, well, I want to be a librarian. What do you do? And I just kind of wait to hear the thing where it's like, yeah, that's the drive. That's, for whatever reason, whatever you just said, that sounds right. That sounds like you could actually enjoy doing this. And if it's something like, I just like doing the research, I don't really care so much about writing it up, but I like doing the process. Someone said that to me one time, like, yeah, that's about right. That's about the feeling that you should be going for.
That's cool. Well, I'll tell you what, Justin, we are right about time, and I want to be very respectful of your time. I sure appreciate you popping on and doing all this stuff. Very open and honest. I really was obviously expecting that of you, so you live right up to expectations, so I appreciate that, man. But right here at the end, I usually like to ask people, hey, is there anything you want to promote, anything coming up? Because I think you're going to come out in just a few days, so how would you have the people interact with you?
Yeah, Library Punk is a leftist library worker podcast. We talk about librarianship through a leftist lens and talk about all kinds of things like metadata anarchy or interviewing people from the Leather Archive and Museum, or sometimes we talk about movies, obviously, because podcasts got to come up with some to talk about. So we've talked about lots of different library movies. And we just had author David Demchuk on to talk about, the publishing atmosphere in Canada right now, and also his new book. And yeah, so you can find that wherever podcasts are, or librarypunk.gay is our website. And then I also have just started a new project called Preacher and the Slave that I do with stand-up comedian Jake Flores. And that is a Preacher recap podcast, but it's also an excuse for me to have a religion podcast because I've been wanting to do a religion podcast for a long time. So that gives me like an outlet for talking about like religion and politics, or just something in comparative religion I think is really cool. And we're watching the show Preacher from the comic book adaptation. And we're, we've had some delays because of the protests in LA, and he lives in LA, so he's been very busy and hasn't had time to record. And I've been leaving town back and forth. So we've got 2 episodes out. It is a visual podcast, so it will have scenes from the show playing while we're talking about them, which is pretty fun.
That's cool.
And so, yeah, I'm excited about it, but we haven't picked up steam yet, but we will.
All right, excellent, man. I'm definitely going to check that one out as well. Well, Justin, thanks again, and I'm going to hit stop on all these things.